700,000 Palestinian Arabs, and now for 20,000 new Jewish settlers, there's always the question, whose hand on the tap? Near Jericho, in the Jordan Valley, Israeli soldiers and settlers play noisily, unaware of the resentment they arouse. Their swimming pool is in fact part of the irrigation system for the Arab village of Oja, bringing the waters of the Oja spring to the drinking taps and fields of the farmers. At Oja, water rights are handed down from father to son. Each farm has its inherited share of the river's flow. It's a system that's generations old. In 1970, a Jewish settlement was established near the village.
They came to what we call in Arabic the Muhtars, and they said to them, we have a settlement here, and we are brothers, Jewish and Arabs, and we want to drink water. And so let's take some water, a small pipe of water from the spring, and to let the Jewish drink. So of course our Muhtars agreed.
It was a temporary arrangement. Soon afterwards, the Israeli state water company, Makarot, drilled the first of its wells to serve the Jewish settlers, right next to the Oja spring.
After the drilling of the wells, each year in summer there had been a reduction in the quantity of water of the spring, but it reached the top when the whole spring was in drought. The water is finished.
For a river which normally flows so freely, to disappear was a major disaster. For the cause, Oja's farmers looked no further than the pipes and wells constructed by the Israeli water company, Makarot. A connection firmly rejected by Israel.
Do you believe that the Oja spring was affected by the Israeli wells drilled nearby?
Absolutely no. For sure no. Hydrologically, it cannot be affected, I mean geohydrologically, because the wells are downstream, in a place to a different, first of all, to a different water zone, what we called aquifer, and the difference in elevation between the spring itself and the water table in these wells is so different that cannot be any connection between them.
The Israelis argue that the Oja spring is fed by an aquifer close to the surface, whereas their settlers use a different aquifer, hundreds of meters deeper. So the Makarot wells could not have dried the spring. But was that the end of Israel's responsibility to Oja?
Well, if the Arab farmers there see that they don't have water to irrigate their groves, vegetable and so on, and their neighbors who take from another source, I mean the neighbors, the Israeli settlements, take straight from a different aquifer, an aquifer that was never used by the local people, but it's in their vicinity and they see it, there is a problem, a human problem, there is. Of course.
During this period that the Oja farmers had no water for their fields, the Israeli settlements nearby had as much water as they needed.
I believe so.
How did you feel about that, in charge of water for the West Bank?
I wasn't happy.
Was there anything you could do?
We couldn't force Makarot. I mean, I couldn't force Makarot to supply with water to the farmers. We tried and we failed.
Did they give you a reason?
They said that they don't have enough water for themselves. In spite of the fact that they have some nice wells and they were pumping a lot, but they had a certain schedule to fill for all the settlements.
Further north from Oja in the Jordan Valley is the Arab village of Bardala. Bardala has never been rich, but the Israeli occupation has brought extra hardship.
هذا البير تبعنا مؤسس بيشتغل قبل 67 كان يضخ مي ويسقي جميع الأراضي اللي واقعة شرقي النهر حوالي 5000 دلم كان يسقيهم البير هذا نفسه بير بردلة هذا الموجود حاليا.
He says that this well, the village well of Bardala, was drilled before 1967. It was drilled in 1965. In 1968, the Israelis drilled another well a few meters up next to this village well, and gradually it dried up their well.
The village well is now abandoned. The Israeli drilling upstream predictably dried both Bardala's water and the springs at the neighboring village of Ain el-Beda.
It was so obvious, really, that if you drill, upstream, from the wells and springs in Bardala and Ain el-Beda, that there will be effect. There was no doubt about it, nothing to predict in advance, It's a known fact, really.
The well which dried out Bardala was drilled to serve the Israeli settlement of Mahola. While Mahola thrived, the West Bank's water officer tried to persuade Israel to help Bardala. After 7 years, the water officer won the argument. But of the original decision to drill upstream from Bardala, he has little to say.
There wasn't the question that time, what is my opinion about it? When I came there, it was a fact. And after this was a fact, we have to look for a solution. A just solution for the people, and we found it. It wasn't easy.
But what was your opinion of the fact?
Well, why should we talk about opinions? Yeah, the fact was that time this. This was the fact.
The solution found for Bardala was to drill another well. The only well drilled for Arab farmers by Israel since 1967. The two systems now operate side by side, one for the Arabs, one for the Jews, though both controlled by Israel.
إذا هم يشتغلوا بحاجة لمي بيعطونا مي، مش بحاجة ما بيعطونا مي من مرة. إذا حياتنا مهددة في الخطر.
Recently, the Israelis have agreed to compensate them for the loss of water. But now he says we are at the mercy of the Israelis. Whenever they are pumping, we have water. If they are not pumping, we don't have water. He says from owners of this resource, we are now becoming renters from the Israelis.
At least Bardala has its water back, 85% of it anyway. Of Bardala's farmers, 15% are classified as absentees. Under Israeli occupation, absentees can lose their land and water rights.
By what right can Israel take away from the farmers of Bardala the water that should have gone to those absentees?
To whom do you think it should have gone, the water from the absentees?
The villagers of Bardala.
To the absentees. But they are absent. So the water has to be utilized by somebody, can be utilized, and I think that the one who is in charge of the everything, that has all the property that used to be before to belong to the absentees, he has the right to decide what to do with them.
By what right can the Israeli authorities take away water because some people are absentees?
Well, this is by right of occupation, actually, because they occupied this area, and so that's it, they do whatever they want.
It's not just West Bank farmers who complain of Israel's water policies. The towns have their problems too. The most prominent Palestinian opponent of Israel's occupation has been the mayor of Nablus, Bassam Shaka. His outspoken conflicts with Israel, especially over water rights, have made him a target for attack. Last year, both his legs were blown off by a car bomb. The shattered wreck still stands outside his house. No one doubts it was Jewish terrorists who maimed him. But after 12 months, there have been no arrests, no charges. Shaka has survived his injuries. and he has not lost his voice.
The military governor look for the water for their aims, not for our aims. And as you know, they control the water in our land, in the West Bank and Gaza, and they control the policy of the water because they want to keep the water for their farmers and the settlements. For that, they forbidden us to drill the wells which we need and which we like.
Nablus, like the other main Arab towns, lies on the West Bank's central mountain ridge. On each side there's an aquifer, but the aquifer to the west is shared with Israel. Arab drilling is forbidden. Only in the aquifer to its east has Nablus been allowed to drill for drinking water.
They give us permission to drill a well farther than Nablus and deep in the Jordan Valley, and it's far about 14 kilometers. For that, the water which we bring it to Nablus, it's be very expensive.
A new well is being drilled for Nablus in the eastern aquifer under Israeli supervision. Zev Golani is no longer water officer for the West Bank, but he still acts as a consultant in the area. Golani believes that the new well can save Nablus money despite its distance from the town. He argues that it makes sense to link up with another well in the eastern aquifer that Israel drilled for Nablus, also without the town's consent and against its wishes.
We encourage them to drill another well in the vicinity because they have already the infrastructures to this direction to take the water. They have the main line, they have the electrical line over there, and it comes out cheaper for them to utilize the second one there and to send the water to Nablus.
But they want to drill wells on the other side of Nablus.
It is right. I know that they asked to drill wells in the other side, but what they need is water. They don't need wells that are taking water from this limited aquifer that is already fully utilized by the Israelis.
The fully utilized aquifer is the western aquifer, from which Israel diverts Arab drilling by arguing that there is still water unused to the east. Water which flows out into the Dead Sea and is wasted unless intercepted before becoming too salty to use.
The mayor of Nablus says he's only been allowed a well to the east of Nablus, not to the west.
That's right, because east of Nablus, water that is not being extracted is getting lost to the Dead Sea. So why not using first water that is getting lost and starting the use of water that somebody else might use it?
But he says that it's
what harm do we cause to Nablus if we supply Nablus with water, with fresh water and good water that is getting lost now? Why demanding only water which can be used by somebody else, either Arabs or Jews? Why not using first the water that is getting lost?
Because it's more expensive to bring water from further east than from the west.
Who told you?
He thinks.
He thinks. I do not accept what he thinks. I do not accept what he thinks. But in a place or in an area where water scarcity is the major problem, I don't understand the question.
But Nablus understands the answer. The Arabs know that it's intensive Israeli pumping on their side of the Green Line which causes water scarcity in the western aquifer. Israel takes 95% of that aquifer's water and, paradoxically, gives some of it back in a way that only makes the Arabs feel more vulnerable. In the town of Ramallah, as in the West Bank generally, domestic use of water has doubled since 1967. But Ramallah is unique. Half its water supply is actually piped from inside Israel. Arab consumers may be glad to be connected to the mains, but Ramallah fears Israeli control through its dependence on the Israeli pipeline. The town claims it was only persuaded to take water from Israel because of the lengthy delays in the authorizing and drilling of its own new well.
We claim for a new well to the Israeli authorities or the occupying authorities to drill a new well in 1972. We got an answer, and I can say it, a negative answer from them, conditioned to connect our water with the Israeli line and to be under their mercy. So now anytime the Israelis, they can stop all the water from our people here in Ramallah district.
Are you sure in your own mind that you would not have got permission to drill that well if you had not accepted the Israeli water?
Yes, my friend, I'm sure of that.
Ramallah now has its new well, though no water is flowing from it as yet. Any suggestion that permission to drill was conditional upon accepting Israeli water is strongly denied by Israel. All they did, say the Israelis, was to build a reservoir and pipeline, lay on a supply of water to Ramallah's doorstep, and then wait for water shortages to exert their own pressure on a reluctant town.
It was summertime, there was lack of water, and I had to do something in order to bring the water to the other side and to distribute the water between the customers.
So what did you do?
I used to telephone him twice a day. No. I'm not the one to create political pressure. It is not my job. So I don't know about any political pressure which were put on Ramallah.
Why do you not want to accept Israeli water?
Because, as you know, we don't want to be under their mercy. Perhaps our students or our people make a demonstration against the occupation. We will be under their mercy. They can stop supporting us by water.
Ramallah already has experience of Israel's control. The Jewish settlement of Ofra was built across the main pipeline leading to the town. When Ramallah refused to supply Ofra with water, the Israelis helped themselves.
The Afra settlement, in spite of our decision not to give them water, and without asking us, they broke the pipes and they connect the water to settlers by force. When we went and we told the military governor, why you are doing such things, which is against the law, he said, and he told me and my colleagues that it is by power. When you get the power, you can do anything you want.
Ramallah feels Israel's hand not just on its tap and well and pipeline, but on its main reservoir too. It's built into the hill overlooking the town, and Israel has chosen to site an army camp on the same hill. The technician who comes to check the reservoir's level twice a day needs a military pass to do so. Having its main reservoir declared a security zone only adds to Ramallah's sense of insecurity. Ramallah's new well may soon rid it of the need for Israel's water. But Ramallah will still feel under pressure if Ofra stays and if the army camp stays.
One of the reasons why the people of Ramallah fear Israeli control of their water supply is that they believe there can be reprisals if there are demonstrations, anti-Israeli demonstrations in Ramallah.
What it has to do with water, I don't know.
Well, they see Ofra sitting on their main pipeline. They see an army camp built around their main reservoir, and they believe that that is political pressure.
I'm working here for since '67. And the only time which we break our rules It was when we closed the water for a certain village because they didn't pay for 6 months or even more. We never close the water to somebody or to any customer because of any other reason.
Israelis ask why Arabs see the supply of water not as a benefit but as a limit to their future independence. Ramallah, they say, can choose to do without Israeli water when and if some form of Palestinian autonomy for the West Bank is agreed.
There are, between two countries, there are always arrangements of water. Now, with the fact that they have now water from Israel, it doesn't mean that later on they won't be able to utilize other sources. For the time being, this was the cheapest and the fastest way to bring water to the people of Ramallah. And thanks God we did it in time.
But they believe that the Israelis don't seriously want a peace, and that this is all part of a process of integrating the West Bank into Israel, to integrate the water supply.
Let me not comment to it, please.
Palestinians are afraid that the forms of autonomy and self-government that are being proposed now by the Israelis are not genuine, that they are merely a way to legalize the present system of continued occupation and continued dependence on Israel. So that if there is going to be true independence one day, then Palestinians need to obtain control of their own land, their own water resources, to build their own infrastructure, to have their own industry, etc., etc.
An infrastructure is being built on the West Bank, but it's Jewish, not Arab. The weeks before the Israeli election were marked by a flurry of construction, laying down the outlines of new settlements to deter any new government from disturbing created facts. As thousands more settlers move in, they reinforce Israeli claims to sovereignty over the West Bank and its water.
In the land of Israel there is one boss, there is one sovereign, and there will be one kingdom, the Jewish kingdom. All other people are more than welcome to take part in the life that is here. But ruler, there will be one.
Whose land are you living on?
In my eyes, I'm living on the Jewish land, on the land of Israel.
Even though at the moment 98% of the population is Arab in this area?
Yes, I think the percentage of population or whoever lives here now or will ever live here doesn't change the basic historic fact that this place here is the birthplace of the Jewish nation. It has always belonged to the Jewish nation and it always will be.
Could you imagine an autonomous Palestinian state having control of the water supply in this area?
You have to ask me a more basic question. Could I imagine a Palestinian political entity in general?
Could you?
No.
As the settlements take root, they underline Israel's need to control the West Bank's water. No Israeli government dare risk the settlers being cut off after autonomy. Just as no Israeli government dare risk its own water supplies being affected by Arab drilling. The most that autonomy offers the Palestinians is joint control of their water, whether they like it or not.
I do not think that we can allow, neither they, that the question of controlling, managing water resources can be separated between the two nations, between the two societies. It must be managed together. We cannot give up control, neither they.
Israel, of course, already has control and will keep it. In the Six-Day War, along with the West Bank, the Golan Heights were captured. Their strategic position threatening Israel is well known. But also in the Golan is one of the main sources of the River Jordan, making Israel master of all the waters between the Jordan and the Mediterranean. Israel has 70% of the region's population, but takes 85% of the available water.
Israel is based on these quantities since the last 20 years or more than that. Reducing these quantities means a reduction of the Israeli map. And this is not acceptable.
The Israelis say that at the moment they use 85% of the available water resources between the Mediterranean and the Jordan, and they can't afford to use any less. There simply isn't room for more water for the Palestinians.
Well, that is the same as saying there is no room for the Palestinians on their own land. That is really the quintessential issue at this point. Palestinians have felt from the very beginning, from 1948, that the goal of Zionism was to obtain this land without its people for the Jewish people who had no land. In other words, they see Zionism as attempting to displace all Arabs and to replace them with Jews. And the statement you just made, that they need the water, that there is no room for them to give water to us, is the same as saying they don't want us here.
In the West Bank, it is Israel's hand on the tap which maintains the status quo. A division of water which Arabs see as delaying their development, limiting their future, leaving them forever in second place. Israelis are motivated not by malice towards the Arabs, but by the wish to protect their settlements, their agriculture, their standard of living. As long as they control the West Bank, they need never concede one drop of water. That control grows tighter with each new settlement.